Hello, and welcome to another session of DPOD. In today's session, we will review DPOD's main screen, the Transactions screen. The Transactions screen is split into two sections. The top section, which contains the filter list, and the bottom one, which displays a grid containing the list of transactions. The filters available in the filter list let the user apply filters to the list of transactions displayed in the grid. Let's focus on the filter list. We'll go over it from left to right. The leftmost filter is the time filter. It filters transactions by time. The drop-down list provides preset time periods alongside the ability to define a custom period. For this demonstration, we'll select the last 24 hours. When applied, the transaction list display changes to match the period selected. The following three filters can be used to filter by device, domain, or service. Each of them allows multiple selection by checking the multiple selection checkbox. Use either the keyboard or the mouse to select which values you wish to filter by. In this example, we will click Apply to update the transaction list displayed in the grid to show only transactions which ran on the selected domains. There is no need to enter values in all filters. In the previous example, our domains span multiple devices, and so DPOD will display all the transactions on those domains across all devices known to it. Let's now select a number of services as well. We select 3 services and let the grid update its display. The next filter is the status filter. It allows the user to filter the display to show either only successful transactions or transactions with errors. This makes it easy to find transactions that are in error state. The next filter is the transaction ID filter. It's displayed here on the grid. The one after that is the client IP, and the last one is the payload filter, which we will talk about later. The administrator may apply restrictions to the payload, client IP, service domain, and device filters. These restrictions can be configured based on specific client IPs, services, devices, or domain names, and can be used to hide certain transactions from specific DPOD users. Let's now reset all the filters and demonstrate a search using the payload filter. A payload search will only work for transactions for which a payload was recorded. We can enter a search term, and DPOD will display transactions that contain this term in their message payload. We will soon show how to view the payload itself. The last filter, which we will examine on the far left, is a special free text filter. When hovering over this filter with the mouse, some of the other filters are highlighted with a blue border. Those filters will participate in the free text search. For example, let's enter IDG 752. This is a device name. We press enter, and DPOD now searches for transactions on this device. We can also search for transaction ID, and DPOD will find it for us. This filter can be used in various combinations with other filters. For example, we can select a device, and additionally, add the operation inside the free text filter. DPOD will then show us the intersection of transactions on the XG751 device, as well as the ping operation. We can scroll down and look for the transactions we need. Later we will show how to drill down into a specific transaction. We can also export the transaction list to a comma-separated value file by clicking Export, which will download the CSV file. You can open this CSV file in any spreadsheet program. Other tools available include the Favorites Filters tool, which allows you to save your favorite and most frequently used filters. Let's take, for example, a filter which previously saved. We can apply it, delete it, or change its name. We can also share the screen with the applied filter with someone else. DPOD creates a shareable link which you can send to other users. Sharing this link does not circumvent DPOD's permissions. If the recipient of the link does not have permissions to view a specific device, they will not be able to view it using the link. Let's now focus on the grid section. At the top, we have the column descriptions. The system administrator can remove some of these columns or rearrange them. Hovering over cells with truncated values will display the full value. Users who do not have permissions to view the payload will not be able to view this column. If the transaction's payload was recorded, the payload icon will appear in this column. Click the transaction ID in order to drill down and view a single transaction's details. Let's do it now. We'll navigate into an example of a transaction screen. We're now going to switch to another browser tab, where we've prepared an interesting transaction to explore. Here we see an example of the transaction we want to analyze. First, let's review the screen's layout. On the left, we have the transaction details, the names of the domain, device, service, the operation, client IP, etc. On the right, we have the transaction analysis section. If errors occurred during the transaction, they will be displayed here. Additionally, if a DataPower probe is activated, this will also be indicated here. This area displayed the total elapsed time of the transaction execution and how this was split between the request and the response, front-end and back-end, as well as how the memory is divided across processing actions. The bottom area is interesting too. It displays the list of raw messages as they were received by DPOD. The Payload tab will only be displayed if the payload was recorded for the transaction and if a user has permissions to view it. The system administrator may block all or specific users from viewing raw messages and message payload according to the rules. The Payload tab contains the backend and front-end requests and responses. The Extended Latency tab displays the individual duration and cumulative elapsed time values of each step in the transaction and processing action. The Last tab displays any side calls that were part of the transaction, if such calls were made. For each side call made by the transaction, the tab displays its result, as well as extra details. As you can see, the specific transaction we're looking at took 3.2 seconds. Let's inspect it to see why it took so long to execute. First, we can see that most of the time was spent inside DataPower. If we look at the Extended Latency tab, we will be able to find that the third processing action took 3 seconds to complete, while all the other steps took negligible time. If we then look at the side calls, we will see that there is a specific side call, an HTTP request, that took 2.2 seconds. This gives us a good direction for the investigation into why the transaction was so much slower than usual. The final thing we can do on this transaction screen is, like before, we can share the screen with other users using a shareable link. And like before, if the user does not have permissions to see the payload, raw messages, or the transaction itself, they will not be able to see it using this link or any other way. Thank you. We'll be happy to see you in our next session.